Welcome to episode 461. This week, the Southern Baptists are meeting in Nashville where, according to the mainstream media, the entire fate of evangelicalism will be decided. Are they right? Plus, Relevant Magazine wonders if Phil's mom gave him good advice about VeggieTales, or was she just playing some weird three-dimensional theological chess game to mess with her son's head? Then Kaitlyn Schiess interviews Taylor Schumann about her new book, When Thoughts and Prayers Aren't Enough, about the side of gun violence most of us forget, the survivors. All of that, plus the story that gave every preacher instantly their sermon illustration for the week when a lobster diver got swallowed by a whale. But first, today's episode is being brought to you by With God Daily, the daily devotional I write for people who hate daily devotionals. Right now, we're going through a series about justice, a kind of divisive topic in our world today, as some Christians think justice is what the gospel is all about, and other Christians dismiss it as a total distraction from the gospel. But what does Scripture actually say about it, and how does it fit with what God is up to in the world and what He calls us to? That's what we're tackling right now in With God Daily. And we're not just looking at Scripture, but we're looking at church history, current events, and other factors that shape the way we perceive this issue. It's the kind of stuff that you don't get in most devotionals because it's not just about sentimentality, it's about being smart and thoughtful about the way we engage our faith. So if that kind of content will be helpful to you, I encourage you to go to withgoddaily.com and find out how you can sign up to receive the email 5 days a week and get the mobile app where you'll have access to archives, the audio devotional, and other resources that are currently in development and will be out soon when With God Daily gets updated later this summer. So check it out right now at withgoddaily.com. Okay, on with the show.
Hey there, it's me, Phil. Welcome back to the Holy Post Podcast. I am here with Sky Jitani. Hi, Sky.
Hi, Phil.
And Jason Rugg. Hi, Jason.
Hey there.
Jason. Hi, Jason.
Hi.
Put down the cinnamon roll and talk to us. And Kaitlyn Schiess. Hi, Kaitlyn.
Hi, Phil.
Hi. If you don't know who these people are, Jason is the world's preeminent expert on cinnamon roll reviews. Sky Jitani is the author of his new book, What If Jesus Was Serious About Prayer? And Kaitlyn Schiess is the author of the book, Liturgy of Politics, and the recipient of the Even Wayne Grudem is impressed that you won the Systematic Theology Award.
No. Couldn't possibly be true.
Okay, and here's the theme song. What's the news that you like the most? Who's your favorite podcast host? If it's breakfast, get your toast. It's Sky and Phil and the Holy Post. Sky and Phil and the Holy Post. And sometimes Christian. But you still are. They didn't take the award back, right? You still have the...
No.
Oh, yeah. So, yeah. And it's,
I think we should name an award after the award. Like, we need a Holy Post Kaitlyn Schiess Memorial Theological Astuteness Award for a Holy Post subscriber. Like somebody who has the best theological comment on our website for the year gets the Kaitlyn Schiess Award, something like that.
Or the person who can bring up the award the most in a 12-month period gets the award.
I like Sky's idea better.
Oh, come on. Oh, gee. What do I don't have any awards.
You have a whole shelf of awards. So does Christian. I'm the one with no awards.
Oh,
you have Dove awards and this award and that award and vegetable awards.
Yeah, okay. There's a bunch of vegetable awards, but like what have you done for me lately? What have I been awarded with lately? Nothing. Jeepers. Kaitlyn, can you pass your award around to us so that we can hold it for? Oh.
Is there anything
I
that
am
was
not going
given?
to do that.
Did they give you anything to commemorate this award? Is there a statue? Is there a certificate?
Is it too big? Is it too big to mail? Is it too big to ship?
It is just a piece of paper, but I am not giving it up. So
okay, it's a piece of paper.
Could you scan it and send us a copy? Just
Yeah.
I'm a little worried about what you would do with it.
Yeah. Could it be printed up on T-shirts for example?
No.
Okay, what's going on in the world, you ask? All sorts of stuff. This is important. Probably a lot of you have heard of this story because it did, in fact, make the news. But a man was swallowed by a whale and spit back out. So, a million Sunday school teachers around the world are saying, yes, I told you it could happen. I told you. If you haven't heard the story, veteran lobster diver, that's hard to say, Michael Packard was diving off Provincetown. Where's Provincetown?
Rhode Island?
Somewhere. Rhode Island, maybe?
Maine? Where is
He's
it?
a lobster diver. Do you know what a lobster diver does?
They dive into
No.
the water and get lobsters.
It seems logical.
Ding, 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 ding. There's Sky's first award of the year. But why don't we have cages? We catch lobsters in cages. Why do we need lobster divers? Do you
To
know?
check on the cages.
No, that's not what they do.
To bait the cages.
Nope. What he does, he goes down and looks for particularly large lobsters that don't fit in the cages and tries to catch them individually and bring them back up. So he's more like a lobster stalker than a lobster diver.
Well, it's a lobster hunter.
Lobster hunter. Yeah, he's a lobster hunter. You don't like stalker? Lobster. Yeah, because he would just be outside like their apartment watching them.
We call people who fish fishers or fishermen.
Or fisher people.
Wouldn't he just be a lobsterer?
Lobsterer. Yeah, lobster. He's a lobster man.
He's a
lobster man.
Lobsterer.
It's a superhero with really big hands. It's Lobster Man. Yeah. Anyway, he was down about 20, 30 feet and looking for those big lobsters. And suddenly he said everything went dark because he was swallowed whole by a humpback whale, which is not something humpback whales usually do. They eat small things. The humpback whale wasn't sure what to do with him. He said, all of a sudden I felt this huge shove, and the next thing I knew, it was completely black. I could sense I was moving, and I could feel the whale squeezing with the muscles in his mouth. Ooh, I don't think I'd like that feeling. Anyone here would want to volunteer for?
No.
I have been on a boat in Alaska watching humpback whales feed. And
on lobstermen?
Well,
lobsterers?
if one happened to be there easily, but it was really incredible because they will blow bubbles in like in a large ring to corral the krill or the small fish, whatever they eat, and then they come up from the bottom like 5 or 6 whales with their mouths wide open, straight up, and then they close their mouths when they reach the surface and just swallow everything that was in that contained area. So it's very imaginable that somebody swimming there just gets caught up in that huge mouth.
Yeah. Although this was not that. They were not. This was one whale, probably a juvenile or a medium-sized whale who was feeding at the bottom on schools of fish and just swimming along with his mouth open and gloop. So he estimates he was in the whale for 30 to 40 seconds before the whale finally surfaced. He struggled and the whale began shaking its head so that Packard could tell the whale did not like what was happening inside his mouth. Then he said, I saw light, and he started throwing his head from side to side, and the next thing I knew, I was outside in the water on my way to Nineveh. I added that last part. But it should be there. He should have done that. The first thing I'd say, what are you going to do? You were swallowed by a whale and spit out. Now what are you going to do? I'm going to go to Nineveh. It should be an ad for like tourism, for Nineveh tourism. Are you with me?
Yeah, that's great.
Guy, that didn't make me feel very encouraged.
Well, like
your feedback.
What would be a modern day Nineveh?
Nashville? Well, New York City, obviously.
Oh, Nashville.
Oh. Are you trying to segue to our next story? Because I have a story before our next story. Yeah.
Here's the thing, though.
Okay,
30 seconds in a whale is not the same as 3 days. So I still don't think this story gives that much credence to the Sunday school teacher of Jonah. Just saying. This
And
was a big
here
debate in my
comes
Hebrew class. Caitlin, I don't know if you had this debate, but
Yeah.
what the
she's already saying
debate?
yes. The debate being what does the book of Jonah really communicate? Is it communicating that Jonah was swallowed by the whale and literally survived alive for 3 days in the great fish and was spit out, or was he swallowed by a great fish and died and was resurrected 3 days later when he was spit out? Because Jesus references that
Oh,
story of
interesting.
Jonah in reference to his own
Right.
resurrection. So, it's complicated.
I think I assume he was kept alive by God inside the whale, and that the connection with Jesus is simply the relation of a whale's belly to Sheol.
Okay.
He was 3 days in the belly of the earth.
But it's also not explicit in Jonah that
Hmm?
it was a whale. All it says it was a great fish.
That's because there was no concept of a sea mammal at
Exactly.
that time.
Exactly.
They didn't know what a whale was.
There was a
They didn't know a
biology
blowhole from a.
student in
I'm
my
not going to
Hebrews
compare it to
class,
anything else.
and he said if it was a whale, if it was a mammal, then it's probably likely that Jonah died because the digestive system of a mammal is much faster than that of a fish. But if it was a great fish,
Boy.
then it was probably a slower digestive system where he could have conceivably survived for 3 days. And you may be asking,
Let's
what does
just
it matter?
assume.
And it really doesn't.
Yes, that's exactly what I'm asking. Let's just assume that in any scenario that God was involved and something that supernatural happened, and we don't have to figure out what it was. Can we just assume that? Or do we
Yeah, I'm
have to
happy.
figure everything out? Do
No,
we
no,
have
no.
to figure everything out? Okay. Do you know Tyler Huckabee? We've talked about him numerous times.
Yeah, he
Okay. We
interviewed
like him.
me
Would you
about
say
my
we
new book
generally.
recently.
What?
Yeah.
You got interviewed by Tyler Huckabee? I've
Uh-huh.
never been interviewed by Tyler Huckabee, but Tyler Huckabee is stalking me like a lobster man. He's actually, I think he's trying to get inside my head. So he put out an article last week, or maybe he's trying to get inside my mother's head. Did you see this? What he did?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Tyler Huckabee said, this is his new article, June 9th. So like 5 days ago, 7 days before my birthday, in case you want to send me a card. Never forget that VeggieTales weren't allowed to show Jesus as a vegetable. Never forget that, Sky. Never forget that VeggieTales weren't allowed to show. And that's wrong right off the bat, because VeggieTales isn't an entity that can be constrained, that has a choice. It was me. I was the entity. Anyway, imagine you're Phil Vischer. It's the early 90s, the era of Nirvana, AOL, and Super Nintendo, and blah, blah, blah. You come up with VeggieTales. VeggieTales is born. But then when you run the idea by your mom, you hit a snag, one that would shape VeggieTales, its characters, and its world forever. You can't show Jesus in VeggieTales. Moreover, none of the vegetables can be shown to have a redemptive relationship with God. This is real, confirmed in 2002 by Time Magazine. I didn't remember that, but I guess that may have happened. When Time Magazine did they devoted a whole issue to an investigative exploration of the theology of VeggieTales. So does everybody remember that? That, in any case, was the rule laid down by Vischer's mom, Scotty May, who had and misspelled my mother's last name. Thanks, Tyler. Tyler. It's M-A-Y, Tyler, not M-A-E. Are you insane? Has a Scotty May, who has a PhD in Christian education and certainly knows what she's talking about. If there's anything, Sky, if there's anything would you say about my mother, it's that she certainly knows what she's talking about.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, Sky knows my mother quite well. She gave her son the twin ground rules for his VeggieTales, as opposed to someone else's VeggieTales. Tyler, against letting the veggies themselves become Christians or depicting Jesus as a vegetable. And Big Idea stuck to them. Okay, now you've got 3 different entities that you're giving conscious choice to. VeggieTales is an entity, Phil Vischer is an entity, and Big Idea is an entity, all involved in this story.
Hold on. I think it's kind of interesting that your mom wouldn't let vegetables have a redemptive relationship with God, even though these are sentient vegetables.
She doesn't recognize that as a thing. I think her thought at the time was, and I've mostly agreed with her, but not 100% agreed with her, is that it's confusing to kids. She doesn't like puppet shows where Mr. Lion accepts Jesus because of the message it sends to kids about animals. I don't know. She's a stickler.
But vegetables?
Yeah,
Like,
that's even worse.
I know. Well, it's kind of strange because the whole
Hey,
point
Mom,
of
I just led my chair to Christ
yeah,
because
but
I named him.
the question is, in the mind of the child, is that character a person or are they a vegetable?
It sounds
There's like a third category.
And what's the
Personal
third
vegetable.
category?
Yeah, just like a character. It's not a person, not a vegetable.
Yeah.
Just
I don't know.
Does-
She might
does
she might
God-
be an anti-veggite.
Does God have a wonderful plan for Bob the Tomato's life? That's the only question you have to answer.
Hmm.
Does Bob have a wonderful plan for your life? So Tyler thinks that it was a good idea, and that it could have gotten into a lot of trouble portraying Jesus as a vegetable.
Totally.
yeah.
But he says, but then I think about Bob and Larry telling kids about the magnificence of grace that they themselves know only secondhand, like the very angels themselves. Think of the wrap up with Bob telling kids, God made you special and he loves you very much, made you special, loves you very much, always you, never us.
Actually, the analogy to angels is a really good one.
Yes, thank you. I didn't make it as Tyler.
But there are fallen angels. Are there fallen vegetables? Are there rotten
Yes.
vegetables?
Yeah. Oh, Mr. Nezer went south for a while, but we got him back.
But
He started
partly
out
out of
he started out
jealousy-
as a villain.
But partly out of
Jealousy.
jealousy that these children get to have a relationship with God that they don't have access to.
Right. On the outside looking in. I did
Right.
always have that sense that like, oh, wow, how do I do this? Because, keeping Bob and Larry on the outside looking in, but still completely enthusiastic about the child's potential for eternity with Christ.
Mhm.
And their ultimate destination was a salad bar. How can they stay positive?
Well, I think they're vegetable messengers. So they're vegetable angels,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, angel vegetables. Because there's a part of the Old Testament where like the Nephilim or the Elohim or the like
The Nephilim.
the Nephilim, and they take the daughters of men to be their wives because they find them good. Maybe they took vegetables as well, and then they produced talking vegetables that were Bob and Larry, that were the Nephilim, the giants in the land. Because, Larry's a little big for a cucumber if you really see him on the countertop. Think about the theological Pandora's box kicked open by Big Idea. If you dare. The VeggieTales vegetables love and are capable of being loved. Junior Asparagus is shown to be a member of a family who themselves reflect God's own love in their devotion to each other. Bob and Larry's friendship, strained though it may be sometimes by Larry's dim-wittedness, is nevertheless a testament to the kindness of God being manifested in the hearts of his children. How then could the VeggieTales gang not be included in God's redemptive plan? Come to think of it, even if Jesus is not actually depicted as a vegetable in VeggieTales, are we, the church, not supposed to be Jesus to the rest of the world? Aren't the vegetables acting as the hands and feet of Jesus? So in a way, the rules are spiritually impossible. That's where he's going with this. It was a slow news week, I guess. Waiting for the Southern Baptists to get together and start shooting each other. Since we're already far down this rabbit hole, let's tumble just a little further. Vischer's mother has a PhD in Christian education. They don't just hand those things out for fun. We must, who one of her teachers was in getting her a PhD?
I know.
In Christian education? Wayne Grudem. We must presume she saw the spiritual fallacies in her own set of rules. Is it possible she was just playing a game of three-dimensional chess against her own son? This is where my mom started to freak out in the article. It's like, whoa, wait. What was I doing? Whoa. You're Phil Vischer in the early 90s. Your mother admires your heart and your drive, but she also knows the hard road ahead. She wants you to avoid simplistic moralizing and cutesy flannel graph lessons. She wants you to get to the good stuff. So she gives you some rules, ostensibly under the guise of keeping VeggieTales safe for theological watchdogs, but perhaps with another, albeit hidden, meaning. The wanton chaos of life without salvation, the invisible presence of Jesus all over our lives, even when he is bodily absent. These are not the sorts of lessons Bob the Tomato or Archibald Asparagus could get into without covering some pretty heady seminary-level theological mumbo-jumbo. But it could be illustrated with some subtle limitations that actually open you up to higher theological truths. Your Phil Vischer, this is the last sentence in the article, your Phil Vischer reading this now. Is your third eye open yet?
Is it open, Phil?
What?
I mean, I think Tyler's been tripping out on some stuff.
The funny thing is, just last week, he wrote an article on the theological use of psychedelic mushrooms. So
There
I don't
you
know if
go.
that had anything to do with this article that came out
Could explain a lot. And and maybe that mushroom had a personality.
So Kaitlyn, wait, let's start with Kaitlyn. Kaitlyn, as an award-winning systematic theologian, do you think Tyler has a good argument? Was my mother playing three-dimensional chess with me?
I hope not. but also I feel like I listened last week to you, Jason, talk about your upbringing. So I'm going to guess that I'm the only one here who grew up listening and watching VeggieTales, like a lot. I mean, I really.
Yes, I did not.
Is that accurate?
I did not grow up watching VeggieTales.
I grew up on VeggieTales too. Yeah.
Okay.
We were Christian. We just didn't go to church. It was a very odd.
Okay. Well, then you can disagree if you would like to, but I feel like VeggieTales contributed to my systematic theology degree. So whatever your mom did, it must have worked because I feel like it all shook out okay for me.
Yeah, and I think I wrote most of the VeggieTales episodes before I could define the phrase systematic theology. So it was any contribution I made was probably accidental. But
I think it worked.
About it. I'm happy about it. But okay, Sky, do you think he has a point? Was my mother playing mind games with me?
No. I think Tyler is playing mind games with himself. Here's what it's like. When I read that article, the impression I got is I was thinking back to my undergraduate days and some of the weird conversations that you have in a dorm room really late at night when people might be inebriated. And what Tyler's article felt like to me is that exact same thing, only at like a Christian college. Like, is this what kids at a Christian college at 2 a.m. who have broken the covenant and are inebriated talk about? That's what it's felt like.
Yes.
Right. It's the equivalent of so Mickey's a mouse, Donald's a duck, Pluto's a dog. What the heck is Goofy? Mm-hmm. I mean, that's the conversation.
Right.
It's the what the heck is Goofy conversation, but with vegetables.
It's a Christian conversation between Cheech and Chong.
Where Tyler Huckabee is both Cheech and Chong.
Exactly.
That's something. All right, Tyler. So, if you want to, Tyler Huckabee, can I call you Tyler Huckabee? If you want to come on the podcast and defend your rabbit hole, then you're invited.
I think you should have Tyler and your mom.
Oh, that would just confuse my mother. I had lunch with her yesterday, and she actually sent the article to me. Not sure what to think about this. This is confusing. Oh, she gets flustered easily. She started this famous moment in our family history when she was making a flan for some family meal, and she'd never made a flan before, and something went wrong, and her flan fell. Her flan fell apart, and she got all flustered and was literally standing in the middle of the room flapping her arms about her flan. And that still comes up. It's like if she gets too flustered, she starts flapping about her flan flapping. So we don't want to stress her out. We don't want to excessively stress her out by putting her on with a magic mushroom influenced Christian journalist who's trying to open my third eye.
What is going on over at Relevant? That's my question.
I don't know. We can find out. I'm sure we can. I'm sure we got someone inside there that can give us the skinny. Okay, this week is a big week. We're only recording one this week because we need to record another one next week because, as far as we can tell, the evangelical world is about to be rent asunder. In fact, it's happening right now. What's happening right now? Jason, guess. What's happening right now?
Something to do with the SBC.
You got it. Way to go. The Southern Baptists are having their annual convention. I think that's what can a convention have a convention? Because it's the Southern Baptist Convention. So can they have a convention?
Sure.
Is the Southern Baptist Convention? Is that the official name?
Yeah, well,
Meeting.
they have the committee on committees, so why can't you have a convention
Do
of
they?
conventions? Yeah.
Wow, that's fantastic. The committee on committees? I love that. It's so meta. So they didn't have one last year. The Southern Baptists did not have their big meeting last year because of COVID. So it's been 2 years. Someone described it as over the last 2 years, the Southern Baptist Convention is a 1-liter bottle of Coke that has been thoroughly shaken, and now they're about to open it. After 2 years of shaking the bottle of Coke, they're now about to open it. We've talked about Russell Moore. Russell Moore left the SBC, not just left the ERLC, where he, was supposedly the person reminding Southern Baptists and America about ethics, biblical ethics. So he left. He issued a letter. No, he didn't. Other people leaked a letter that he wrote internally that talked about really why he couldn't take it anymore, why he'd had enough. And it was a little less about, being attacked because of Trump and much more about the responses to his calls for investigating sexual abuse cover-ups and the sex abuse scandals within the SBC, and some of the responses on race and how he'd been attacked on issues of race and his support for racial reconciliation. So that went out. One of the guys, Mike Stone, that's running to be the new president of the SBC, said he was just trying to become a celebrity and it was all fake, false, fake news, terrible. Someone else revealed recordings that included Mike Stone and others saying some of these things, so that didn't look good. So there's 3 people running for the new president of the SBC. One of them is considered a moderate, or a little more open to, hey, let's just get back to teaching the Bible and let's not be culture warriors. Then there's Mike Stone, who's like, let's kick out the infidels. And then there's Al Mohler, is considered by some almost moderate, but only when compared to Mike Stone. That's the background. That's what's going on. They all want to get rid of critical race theory because, of course, it's destroying the church as we know it. They want to stop, for the most part, talking about the sexual abuse scandal because that doesn't help anybody. And they're all getting together this week to haggle it out. There are groups. The conservative group is referring to themselves as pirates, and they're taking the ship, and they're bringing pirate flags to the convention, and they have T-shirts that say "Take the ship." So, okay, Kaitlyn, what are you thinking about the SBC right now? Do you wish you were in Nashville? We have multiple friends there. Bob Smetana is there. Jonathan Merritt is there. Sarah Pulliam, Bailey, is that her name? Is there?
Mm-hmm.
Beth Moore is tweeting about it. Got some really interesting. Ryan Burge is tweeting about it. Bob Smetana, if you follow him, is live tweeting the whole week, like minute by minute. So there's fun stuff going on. Kaitlyn, what do you think? Kaitlyn, what do you think?
It's a mess. I don't. I do. It reminds me a little bit of our conversation with Mike of like weeks ago about how Mike Erie, yeah, about how any man-made organization is going to have sins and injustices baked into it. And that doesn't mean the SBC is worse than other organizations, but it does mean that there have been historically forces, especially in the last 20 years in the SBC, that seem to operate as if the highest good the SBC can do is protect its reputation and protect itself. And watching even really good intentioned people basically say, yeah, we might even have to deal with some of that stuff, but the main goal is just to keep this thing running, is really discouraging because it puts a lot of weight on human efforts. It acts as if we don't operate in the way we've always operated. If we don't operate in this certain organization, the gospel won't be preached or things won't, as if God can't continue without this thing that we have made. But It also just allows us to justify all sorts of really awful things. If the main goal is just keep the thing running, you can justify ignoring a lot of really awful stuff that's happening. And you can justify demeaning the people who leave, right? Like if the goal is just keep the thing going, if numbers matter, if appearance matters, if political influence matters above the wholeness and unity of the people of God in whatever organization we end up being in, then you can kind of look at people leaving and kind of go, good riddance, we're going to keep doing this thing that we're doing without listening to the people who say some things need to change, even if it momentarily looks like the thing is falling apart. Like dealing with the sexual abuse stuff, dealing with the racism stuff, it's going to cause what looks like more division. It's going to cause real problems. It might look like numbers are going down and things are really bad and things are falling apart. And that is prioritizing a human perspective on things over just being faithful to what God has asked us to do and trusting that in his providence and the whole history of the world, that if we are faithful to call out injustice and seek wholeness, then even if the numbers look really bad, things will be better for it.
Yeah, it feels a lot like what happened inside the Ravi Zacharias ministry,
Yeah.
where it's like, oh man, we're doing so much good. Ooh, we're uncovering some ugly. We gotta keep that on the down low because of the good we're doing. Or you go back 20 years and it was the Catholic Church. Oh, we're doing so much good. This parish is doing so much good. The global church is doing so much good. Ooh, there's some ugliness. We got to keep that down so it doesn't wipe out the good we're doing. And then it ultimately, evil comes out. When there's evil in an organization, it comes out, and then, wow, you've really messed up the good you're doing.
I agree with that, but I think there's another dynamic going on with the SBC, which they're not just saying, hey, we need to keep our eyes focused on all the good we're doing and not be distracted by these challenges. Instead, what they're saying is there's a greater threat we should really be focused on, which in this case is CRT. The analogy that comes to my mind is it's like the SBC is a car that is speeding along the highway and the steering doesn't work and the brakes have failed and the engine's on fire and there's a passenger in the backseat who's just been shot who needs to be getting to the emergency room, and you have another passenger who's pregnant about to give birth, and like all these, every catastrophe you could imagine is going on, and the driver is freaking out because like somebody spilled a soft drink. Like that's what it feels like. Like that's not the most important thing right now. And with the SBC, like people are losing their minds over critical race theory as if that's the biggest challenge they have on their hands, and it's threatening the whole operation when everything else in the world is going wrong, but they think
Right.
it's the soft
Right.
drink that's the problem.
I tweeted about this when it came out. I don't know if we'd ever talked about it on the show. The conference on, what was the conference last weekend, Kaitlyn, on
Wokeness and the gospel.
wokeness and the gospel.
Yeah.
A big staged at a big mega church in Texas. The pastor, someone sent me the invitation video. It was a ticketed event, so you had to spend money to go learn how bad wokeness is for the gospel. And in the invitation video, the pastor said, literally, in all my lifetime, I have never seen an ideology as dangerous as critical race theory. And this is a pastor who is old enough and lived in the South, old enough to remember lynching in the name of maintaining white supremacy. So, it's the ability to create hysteria selectively. We're going to narrow down to this, and now this is the worst thing I have ever seen in my life, is kind of astonishing. Sky.
Yeah, it is. And what makes it more astonishing, though, is not only is it hyperbole and an inflation of, maybe you have legitimate concerns about CRT, I think reasonable people can, but when you put that next to the sexual abuse scandal that's going on, the historic racism that, as Russell Moore has uncovered, continues to exist within the ranks of the leadership of the SBC, at the end of the day, those two things are far, far greater threats to the witness of the gospel of the SBC than critical race theory is. So it almost feels like a deliberate and intentional distraction from the issues that you don't want to talk about. And I hope that's not the case, but in some rhetoric I've heard from some SBC leaders, that's certainly what it sounds like. That they'd rather deal with this imaginary problem than deal with the real problem, because they might be indicted because of the real problem, whereas they don't even know what CRT is, let alone guilty of practicing it, so they're fine talking about that.
So one of the leaders of the conservative Baptist movement, and there was a conservative takeover of the Southern Baptist Convention in the late 1970s and 1980s that was partly led by Al Mohler and a couple others, Paige Patterson and a couple others, and now this is kind of this is part two, the sequel. Let's do it again. Pastor Todd Starnes was recently quoted saying that we have to take over the convention again because the SBC is being led by, and this is a quote, a radical group of never-Trumpers and woke critical race theorists. So our friend Ryan Burge, which paints a picture that, wow, the SBC is really going downhill towards liberalism and losing its way. Our friend Ryan Burge, who is a sociologist and studies data, requoted that and said this statement is empirically false. And so he dug into the stats. He said, if there's any type of liberalism creeping into the Southern Baptist Convention, it doesn't show up in the data. In fact, just the opposite. The share of weekly attending SBC members who believe the Bible is literally true has never been higher than it is right now. So there's no evidence of theological liberalism. The share of weekly attending Southern Baptists who identify with the Republican Party was 73% in 2020. That's higher than it's ever been. So there's no evidence of creeping political liberalism within the SBC. The share of weekly attending Southern Baptists who believe that women should have a choice to have an abortion is 20%. That's the lowest as long as they've been asking that question. The share that want to outlaw abortion completely is 44%, the highest since they've been asking that question. So there's no liberalism on the topic of abortion. And so he goes down a list. The share of weekly attending Southern Baptists who voted for Obama in 2008 was 22%. For Biden in 2020, it was 23%. So 1 percentage point more liberal in who they voted for, Republican or Democrat. So he's going through the data saying there's simply no evidence that anything is shifting, and yet we've got pirates saying they have to storm the ship and take over to put it back on the right course.
So I think that data reveals, and the response to it reveals, the cognitive dissonance that the SBC is struggling with. On the one hand, they've gotten everything they've been after for the last 30 years. They're more conservative, more Republican, more pro-life, more bibliocentric, more patriarchal than they've ever been in the history of the SBC. And yet numbers are down. The churches are shrinking. Sexual abuse is a problem, so they have to explain that. And there's only two options. You either say, well, maybe all the conservative theology and cultural values and policies we've been after for 30 years isn't helping us advance the gospel, or there's some other quality going on here that we have to give an account for. So it must be those closeted, secret, liberal, CRT believing, Trump hating people are out there, and they're the ones sabotaging it all, which is why we have to do the piracy takeover. But the data just doesn't match the reality, and that cognitive dissonance has to be resolved somehow.
So Beth Moore tweeted yesterday, said, this is overly simplistic regarding the Southern Baptist Convention, but I picture an intensity scale of 1 to 10, where 10 is extreme fundamentalism. Once the 8s, so the people that are 8 on the fundamentalist scale, are decried as woke feminist liberals, all you've got left is the battle of the 9s and the 10s. Fundamentalists are going to fight. It's in the water. So, they've named Russell Moore, we've had him on the show, many times, is extremely conservative politically, extremely conservative theologically. He's been declared a woke liberal by, several people just in that conference. He was listed as a name of people who have gone woke liberal. He's an 8. He's at best, he's a 7. But he's been declared the enemy because only the 9s and 10s have decided they're really being true to the faith.
And eventually the 9s and 10s will turn on each other.
Yeah, they'll come up with some reason to... how would you define, because some people are mad, you're saying fundamentalism is a bad thing, and fundamentalism just means we stick to the fundamentals of the faith,
No,
Sky Jatani. So how can you say it's a bad thing?
No, and when I tweeted about this earlier. I think all fundamentalisms, there's fundamentalism on the left. There's fundamentalism in Hinduism and Islam and Buddhism and atheism, and every ism has a fundamentalism component to it. So the argument of fundamentalism is essentially one of purity. that you're not allowed to doubt or deviate at all from what we've determined is absolute truth. And if you do, you're out. And the instinct of fundamentalism is always toward ever increasing purity. So you have to constantly find more and more impurities to be against, because the way you define your value is by what you're against. So eventually, yeah, you do drive out all the 7s and 8s on the scale, and you're left with the 9s and the 10s. And eventually the 10s look at the 9s and go, you're not pure enough either. And then the 10s look at, 10.5s look at the 10s and go, you're not pure enough. And it goes narrower and narrower until you're left, I jokingly said, with just you and the God you created in your own image. There's no one left. But that's what the instinct of fundamentalism is. When you define everything by what you're against, you have to constantly come up with new things to be against, and it never ends.
Right. A guy named Brad Edwards, not sure who he is, but he responded to Beth Moore and said this: how much of what we're watching within broader evangelicalism is the dissolution of Billy Graham and Jerry Falwell's political marriage, with the latter, the fundamentalists, trying to get the house, the car, and custody of the kids? What do you think about that idea?
I agree, but I think it started a lot earlier. I don't think this is new. I think it's been going on for a while. In fact, I would argue that the fundamentalists probably won this battle back in the 90s. They just didn't realize it. Nobody realized it, but I think they took over decades ago.
Support that idea.
Well, when you listen to what Billy Graham was saying in the late 80s, early 90s, into the early 2000s, he was way, way more moderate in his cultural and political views than a Jerry Falwell or a Pat Robertson or many, and they were the ones, or even Focus on the Family and Dobson. So I think the fundamentalist wing of evangelicalism has taken over for a long time. They're just being a lot more bold about it than they used to be. They're done hiding behind the big tent evangelicalism of Graham. But yeah, they acquired all the property long time ago.
Kaitlyn?
Well, I mean, I think part of it, I mean, obviously there are historical reasons for how all of this stuff shapes out, but I also just think fear is an easy, powerful motivator. And so if you can convince people that your denomination is being taken over by all of these buzzwords that you already know to fear, like you know to fear liberal and Marxist and critical race theory, you already know, you've been primed to. It makes me think of Samuel Perry's tweet about how he'd been talking to all these people at the Wokeness and the Gospel conference who didn't seem that radical to him. They were just afraid. Like they had been taught to fear that their country was being taken over, their denomination was being taken over, they're the persecuted ones. And when you're already afraid, then you're ripe for all of these other things. And it just made me think about how, on one hand, yes, it's easy for us to look at the most extreme versions of this stuff and go, I could never be that. But you marinate in fear of stuff long enough and you find yourself where you were a 6 or a 7, all of a sudden you're a 9 or a 10 on the scale because you've become so afraid. I mean, I was getting on an airplane yesterday, and it made me think about how easy it was to like marinate in the fears of the people around me, because we were all waiting to get on the plane. And like, I don't care about how early I get on the plane. It's not even a Southwest flight. I have a seat, like I'm going to get there. But you're in this crowd of people that slowly inch closer and closer, and you all get really, it just feels like you physically feel more tense. Like I have to, like I watched people shove other people out of the way. People who I'm sure are normally nice and kind, but like the energy in that space is so intense. It's like, if I don't get there before you, I'm not getting on this plane, which is a crazy thing to think.
And no one's getting to California before anybody else.
No.
Is it? But at what point in that line did you push the child to the ground, Kayla?
I would never do that.
In a normal circumstance. But
it does take a lot of like, you find yourself doing things you never would have imagined you would do. And it takes a real like come to Jesus moment to be like, I'm not worried about getting on this plane. Like, I feel like if you're at the wokeness conference, you have to have a moment where you come to Jesus and you're like, I'm not afraid of these things that I'm being told to be afraid of, because it's so easy.
Have you ever been in one of the 2-lane McDonald's drive-thrus where there's 2 lanes for ordering and then they have to merge down to 1 lane for paying and get your food, and someone tries to get in front of you at the merge when it is obviously your turn? This has never happened to me. That's why there's no emotion in my voice. But suddenly you consider driving straight into their driver's side door and just T-boning them in the drive-thru, because that's not how it's supposed to work. Has that ever happened to you? That's
I don't
not
go to
happening.
McDonald's.
No.
Oh, Sky, come on. There you go. No matter what I say, how can I pour cold water on what Phil just said? I don't go to McDonald's. I have all my food baked by chefs and delivered to my house.
I get Christian chicken with a pickle. But Kaitlyn's point and your point is right. The moment you create an environment where normally people are hospitable and kind and chill, and you put competition into it or a stressful environment, it transforms us. And as Christian leaders, our job should be to de-escalate those kind of environments and point people back to the truth of the gospel and the presence of Christ and the fact that we don't have to be afraid. And yet many Christian leaders today do precisely the opposite for the reasons Kaitlyn cited. It's a great way to motivate people to raise a lot of money and to build a following.
Okay. Here's what's annoying me. Can I tell you what's annoying me besides that lady that jumped my place in line in the McDonald's drive-thru and I almost T-boned her to get my quarter pounder, which seems ironic, a downgrade of meat quality. 50 years ago, okay, the 60 years ago, the Southern Baptists actually went out of their way to say we're not evangelicals. Evangelical is a northern thing. It's Graham and Carl Henry. It's Christianity Today. It's Wheaton, maybe Grand Rapids. We're not evangelicals. We're Baptists. And then the political marriage of convenience happened in the late 70s, early 1980s. And the SBC took on the mantle of evangelical for, because of the religious right and political leaders. Now we have, and this is why I'm talking about this whole story, because this is in the New York Times. It's in like every major newspaper. It's in every major magazine. The future of evangelicalism is on the line, and it's being determined this week in Nashville. And the reason the SBC didn't want to be called evangelicals because they considered it a northern thing, and they represented Southern Christianity. So the fact that Southern Christianity is shaping what people consider northern evangelicalism is really kind of bugging me. I gotta say, it's like, what is there some place you can go to register a complaint? Is there a suggestion box for the global media to say, hey, can we talk about the difference between Northern evangelicalism and Southern fundamentalism and how Southern fundamentalism should not be considered in the driving seat for all of evangelicalism?
Yeah. In short, yeah, there should be a different...
It's okay. Pour cold water. Kaitlyn, you got any last thoughts?
That's definitely true. I also think, though, part of why, because I've been frustrated with all of the national coverage of the SBC and I've seen people on Twitter, especially people who are a part of maybe mainline or even not mainline, like PCA denominations, that feel like, why does the SBC get kind of all of the coverage and act like they're the
right?
But the part of it that is true, that's fair to the media to do that, is one, the way SBC publishing has influenced tons of churches outside of the SBC. I mean, I went to a church that was not an SBC church, and a ton of the Bible studies were Lifeway published SBC teachers. The other part of it is, I think some of us struggle to realize the influence of the SBC because of the amount of churches that aren't involved at the national level stuff, that don't advertise that they're SBC, but are, and trickle down, kind of have influence when it comes to the racial stuff and the sexism stuff. And I mean, the amount of people I knew in Dallas who would have sworn up and down their church was not an SBC church. It's just a independent, Baptist and theology kind of church, and then found out in some way that actually it was an SBC church, but that just wasn't the label that kind of got thrown around. It makes it really hard to kind of figure out what kind of influence the SBC has when it's a bunch of independent churches that a part of their identity is autonomy. And so you have a ton of influence that might be hard for some of us to see because people don't even realize their church is SBC. They don't realize the power they might have to influence what's happening at the national level. And even if your church is not an SBC church, you're getting influenced by those conversations because of their historic, relationship with political leaders, but also because of publishing and conferences and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And, Rick Warren's church is an SBC church, which I'm not even sure I knew that. It's why he's in trouble for, for ordaining a couple of women. And there's a lot of SBC churches in the Pacific Northwest. Do you know why there are a lot of SBC churches in the Pacific Northwest? Do you know why, Kaitlyn? Do you know why, historically? Because of the gold rush. because of the gold rush, because right before the gold rush in California, there was a gold rush in Georgia. And so all of the people that had been digging for gold in Georgia, who were Southern Baptists, took off for California together and started Southern Baptist churches in California around the California Gold Rush. So there, you learn something every day. The only other historical thing that I would love to dive into more, but we don't have time right now, is the idea is that there was a political marriage between Billy Graham and Falwell that brought together Northern evangelicalism and Southern fundamentalism. I don't think that's accurate. I haven't seen evidence that Graham was a driver in that. Where I would point to is Francis Schaeffer. I would point to Francis Schaeffer, who is a really well-respected intellectual. So he was part of the, quote unquote, smart part of
Smart America.
Smart American conservative Christianity, who wrote the book, late 1970s, wrote the book, Whatever Happened to the Human Race, which decried a couple of things, abortion, euthanasia, and I forget, there was like one other big, bogeyman that was on that, like, we've lost our minds. As the human race has lost its collective mind, we no longer value life. And that was the book that inspired folks like James Dobson and Paul Weyrich and others to say, abortion is the thing that we can use to bring together the concerns of Southern fundamentalists with Northern evangelicals, because race doesn't do it. Race doesn't bring them all together. Abortion could bring them all together. After that, Francis Schaeffer doubled down and then wrote the book Slouching to Gomorrah. And really picked up this mantle of culture war, that we need to do something to take back the culture because it is slouching to Gomorrah. And it was that movement that brought, people that weren't considered fundamentalists, like James Dobson, who was a psychologist from Southern California, or the LaHaye's and some others, brought them all together under this new tent that picked Ronald Reagan to be the next president. They all got behind Reagan, and that's why we all, as evangelicals and as Southern fundamentalists, came out for Reagan in 1980 and 1984. And that's the marriage that now has the Southern fundamentalists fighting for the kids and the car and the house. And, how many of these mainstream journalists have called Christianity Today to ask for an interview about the state of evangelicalism this week? I don't know of any. There you go. I'm done. Are you guys done? Anything else?
Okay, one thing about what you just shared there, which I've never been able to figure out or reconcile, is the Southern fundamentalists' approach to culture and government was essentially a states' rights approach, right? The federal government should leave us the heck alone and let us do what we want, whether it's segregation or private Christian schools, just leave us alone. The reason they got motivated is because the government wouldn't leave them alone. And Brown versus Board of Education and the IRS coming into Bob Jones University and they just want to be left alone so they could do what they want. But once they added in the abortion issue and got a lot of Northern evangelical support, on the abortion front, it was the exact opposite. It was, we want the federal government to intervene and tell states they can't allow abortions. So they had this mixed message of one of states' rights and one of federal oversight, depending on the issue. And what we have now is there's a weird hybrid that's emerged where, on one level, a lot of conservative fundamentalist Christians want the government to stay the heck out of their business and let us do what we want. But on the flip side, some of them are willing to storm the Capitol when it doesn't go the way they want so they can take it over and impose their will on the whole country. So there's this schizophrenia going on within a lot of conservative Christianity about what do we actually want here and what are we doing and what's the right approach and do we want to be left alone or do we want to be in control and is the culture really terrible and bad? Should we withdraw or are we supposed to take it over? And it's just chaos, absolute chaos. And in that steps these dynamic strong men like a Donald Trump or some pastors who say, I'll protect you, I'll lead you. And people are like, thank you, because we don't know what we're doing. And that it's a perfect environment for authoritarianism and fundamentalism to thrive because they both thrive in chaos. And I think that's what you're seeing in the SBC.
So, Kaitlyn, got anything else?
Yeah. I'm going to pivot really hard because I just think that if you're on Twitter watching all the SBC stuff, or if you're listening to this during the week of all the SBC stuff, I just think this is a perfect chaotic opportunity to remember that the church is so much bigger than whatever little slice I am in, or whatever little slice has influenced my country, or whatever denomination I'm in, or even my specific church. If things seem like they're falling apart, the church is global and centuries old. And it's just helpful for me sometimes to remember that while all of this has been really bad for a long time, as it's helpful to look at the history of how things have developed, this is such a tiny slice of the global historic church. And even if the Southern Baptist Convention even if the SBC just doesn't exist anymore, and even if all of the mainstream media are right and that causes all of evangelicalism to just disappear, that is not the end of the faith and the faithfulness of God to his people on earth.
Are you sure?
I'm certain.
Okay. Kaitlyn said so, everybody.
Good
The
word.
award-winning theologian said, "It is so. I believe it. That settles it." That's my new saying. Kaitlyn says it. I believe it.
No,
that settles it. It's going to be okay. Sky, do we have a guest?
I think so, and I think the guest might be interviewed by Kaitlyn.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Taylor?
Yeah. I think that's what's up.
What's things are happening behind my back that I don't even know about. I don't know how I feel about this. Well, I'm just going to go out with Jason and we're just going to eat cinnamon rolls, and we're not going to invite you guys because you're not even telling me what you guys are up to.
You're going to love it, Phil.
Okay.
If that's what it is, it's really good.
Okay. I better. Okay. Thanks for listening, everybody. Thanks for supporting us on Patreon. And come back next week, definitely, because we will, listen to the guests, because it's going to be fantastic, I hear. I have it on good authority. But then come back next week, because we're gonna know what the future of the churches from Nashville is going to tell us. And I think it has country music in it, whatever the future is. Okay. See you guys later. Bye.
Today's episode is being brought to you by you. Well, at least those of you who are Patreon supporters of The Holy Post. You make our show possible, and we can't thank you enough. Thanks to our Patreon supporters, we're also able to expand into other shows like The Movie Proposal that I do with Josh Lindsay. And we have special projects coming up like the special sub-series of Jesus and John Wayne, where I interview historian Kristen Dumais about her book and how we can understand the current evangelical moment through our understanding of history. That'll be coming out soon, and we're going to release it to our Patreon supporters first. So if you're not yet a Patreon supporter, now's a great time to check out becoming one. For just $5 a month, you'll get access to bonus interviews with our incredible guests, and for $10 a month, you can join me, Phil, and Christian for our monthly live stream where we talk unfiltered and directly with you, our Patreon supporters, answering your questions about anything and everything. It's a ton of fun, and I think you'd love to be a part of it. So go to holypost.com and hit the Support Us link to learn more about how you can become a true Holy Poster by supporting us through Patreon. So last year, back in episode 423, I interviewed David French about America's gun culture, and he was especially helpful unpacking the legal history and constitutionality of guns in America. But one of the areas we really didn't talk about was the deeply personal impact that gun violence has on so many Americans. And that's what today's interview is all about. Taylor Schumann was a survivor of a school shooting in 2013, and she's lived with permanent wounds both visible and invisible from that day. She sat down with Kaitlyn Schiess to talk about her new book, When Thoughts and Prayers Aren't Enough, a shooting survivor's journey into the realities of gun violence. Obviously, this is a topic that people feel very strongly about on both sides, but I think you'll be challenged and encouraged by Taylor's story, and perhaps even motivated to think of this not just as a political issue, but as a profoundly Christian one. Here's Kaitlyn Schiess's interview with Taylor Schumann.
Hi, Taylor. Thanks for joining me today.
Hey, Kaitlyn. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, this is so fun because Sky normally does the interviews and he's friends with everyone on the planet. So he starts a lot of them talking about how he's friends with them. And I feel really lucky that I can truthfully say I am friends with you, internet friends even.
Yes.
And so it's fun to talk to you about a book that I've watched you kind of write along the way, seen the updates. And so that's fun.
Yeah, that's so true.
So your book, When Thoughts and Prayers Aren't Enough, A Shooting Survivor's Journey into the Realities of Gun Violence, is coming out soon. And actually, the day we're recording it, I just saw you posted on Twitter that today is National Gun Violence Awareness Day. So that's kind of appropriate that we're talking about it. As someone who's read it, I really sincerely believe this is something that you could hand someone regardless of what they think, and they could learn something, their mind could potentially be changed, which is not true of a lot of books that just kind of are actually written for the people who are already there on whatever the issue is.
Yes.
You know, like we all kind of have agreed on some things, and I'm going to give you some better arguments. And I love the way that you wrote it so that I really could give it to someone who I'm kind of pretty much where you are in the book on gun reform, but I could hand it to someone who's pretty suspicious of gun reform. And I think they could at least learn something or change their mind a little bit.
Thank you. I really do appreciate that. And I think I was positioned well to do that kind of writing because I haven't always felt the way that I feel now about guns. I was like polar opposite of where I'm at now. And a lot of my loved ones and friends are in that place too. So I think I just have a unique perspective to be able to write to people kind of on both sides. And I'm thankful for that.
Yeah, me too. So yeah, like you said, the first part of your book is heavily about your own story. And don't feel like you need to give too much away. I hope people will read it. It was really, truly moving for me. But could you just share a little bit about why you felt that sharing your story would be a good way to start the book, why you were wanting to kind of talk about your own story in a book at all and kind of use that format to talk about your story? It was really moving for me, but I wondered, you know, if that was difficult, but also kind of why you felt like this is an important way to start the conversation.
Yeah, I'd known I wanted to write a book about this for a really long time. And part of that is that my story, what I experienced, I know that God performed so many miracles that day, and he was in it from day one. And I always knew I wanted to share the story kind of how God intervened and saved my life that day and how he's worked in my life since. And so it felt important to me to open it in that way, but also because although we are seeing a lot of gun violence in the news lately, a lot of mass shootings, we hear about it. Most people don't know someone personally who has experienced gun violence, regardless of kind of how prevalent it can be in the news at times. And if you don't know anyone personally, you haven't experienced it yourself, it's really easy to see it on the news, forget about it, go on with your life until the next time it happens. It doesn't give you a great entry point into the issue because you just don't have to think about it. And it's not out of malice or even ignorance. It's just, if you don't have to think about it, why would you think about it? And then it's hard to find an entry point into a conversation about gun reform. And so I think that I want to tell the story because that's how we learn about each other, right? That's how we learn about things that we haven't experienced personally, is by telling stories and listening to stories. That's how I've learned about things like immigration and refugees and racial injustice, all of these things that I have not personally experienced, but I can hear a story, and that's my access point into that issue. And I wanted to offer that to people who don't know anyone that's experienced gun violence, because truly, I hope people don't. Like, I don't want more people to know more people who've experienced gun violence. So if I can offer my story in a way that invites people in to say, hey, this isn't just my issue, this is all of our issue. And if you need to put my face on this to care about it, then let's do that. Like, I want to share this story with you. So definitely a few reasons I wanted to do that. And then to kind of emphasize the point that this can really happen to anyone. And, if you don't care about it now, you might have to care about it later, but in a totally different way. And, just to put a real person, a real face to this issue that can sometimes feel very far away.
Yeah, I think it was really effective in doing that. I felt like I was someone who at least politically cared a lot about gun reform, just from like research I had done and books I had read. But I still, when I heard a shooting happened on the news, especially if no one died, I kind of thought, oh, well, that's good. Like, I hate that I thought that, but I thought, oh, you were shot, but you weren't killed. That's really great. And reading your book was so helpful for me to think through physically and mentally and emotionally all the layers and time and the ways that it impacted you. Because like you said, when I hear that on the news, it's, on one hand, I make the really awful mistake of thinking, oh, if you didn't die, then that's great. You're lucky, a horrible thing to think. But I also, because I don't know people, I don't think about it for more than a second. Yeah. So I think that was this horrible day in your life. And I don't think anything about what it looks like afterwards. And your book describing not just the workplace shooting that you were in, but then all of the time after that was so helpful for me to see what that was like. I want people to read the book, but what kind of things about that kind of aftermath experience do you think people get wrong about shootings in kind of a personal way?
Yeah, I think, we tend to remember shootings in numbers. So whether it's, 0 people killed or, I went to Virginia Tech. And so the number 32 is always ingrained in my memory. 32 people were killed. And I rarely remember how many people were injured. And I can say the same about Parkland or Sandy Hook. And we do that for a reason. That's just how we contextualize things. And it wasn't until I experienced it myself that I thought, I never hear the numbers about people who were injured and didn't die, because we tend to have that same thought you did. Well, no, they didn't die. That's great. That's great. And we don't hear about it again. Like, we're not like following these people in sort of like a documentary style format, like we see it on the news, we see some pictures, and then it's done. We don't have to think about it anymore. So we don't know, oh, wow, they're having another surgery. They have to go to the doctor 3 times a week. They're in counseling. They're having trouble with this. We just don't have to think about it. And because it didn't happen to us and it's not our loved one. And I think that's probably the main thing we get wrong about the effects of gun violence, the effects of shootings, is that we don't really know what it looks like to survive one and keep moving on with our lives, because the numbers that we tend to focus on, and justifiably so, are the people who die, because that's, a tragedy and we have to care about that. But it does leave kind of a blank space in what we know about who survives and what it's like and the impact that has on that person, their family, their community, on and on and on.
Yeah.
And that's really why I wanted to kind of document this for people, to say, hey, this isn't just one day for people. This is many, many days and years, and it's always a part of them. And this is what it looks like.
One of the things that I'm really passionate about when it comes to political issues, but also when it comes to just things Christians get wrong in the world, is identifying the way that we are shaped by stories, like you said earlier, personal stories, but also just larger stories that our communities tell ourselves. And we often get them through media. And I was thinking, as I was, going back over your book this morning, I was thinking about how prevalent guns are in media, like the TV shows, the movies. I'm living with my parents for the summer and they watch a lot of cop shows. There's so many guns. And it made me realize, I think of people who grew up in a culture of guns as people who grew up maybe in a rural area. There was hunting involved. They saw guns a lot. And I didn't grow up that way. I didn't see any guns growing up. I didn't know anyone really who hunted or who shot guns for fun. But in another really significant way, I did grow up in a culture of guns because I saw it portrayed all the time in ways that were unhelpful. So can you talk a little bit about, I want to get into later some of the specific arguments that are commonly given against gun reform, but what are some of the just like stories that we might be consuming that we don't realize that we're consuming about guns? Because it's so hard. I was thinking about it today, thinking about these shows and movies that I've watched, how hard it is to realize how much that has shaped my assumptions about guns. And unlearning that takes learning what's wrong about them. And sometimes I don't know how to do that.
Yeah, that's a great question. I really relate to that because, I grew up in an area that there's a lot of gun owners. Hunting is very common, but we didn't always have guns at our house. I never really saw them. I just knew it was kind of part of life. Oh, guns, It's a gun. But I grew up watching the same kind of things, the cop shows, action movies with my dad, all those kind of things. And I think the main takeaway from so many of these things is that guns are used so often in matters of self-defense or protection. And I think that helps to kind of solidify this belief that we have to have guns for protection or for self-defense, and that it's almost inevitable that we will need them for that reason. And it really doesn't reflect reality. It's hard to have solid numbers on self-defensive gun use, but it's really not that common. Not as common as, TVs and movies would have us believe. But we see these images and we're like, oh, it's, a hero, good guy with the gun, TV, movies. It's a great place to write that into a story, and it makes for good TV. It makes for good movies. So we definitely, I think that's probably the biggest thing I see. And then it ends, like the TV show, the movie, it ends. And you don't have to think about, oh, that person was hurt with the gun and they were wounded and they have medical bills. We don't have to think about that. I remember after I was shot, we were watching something. I can't remember what it was now. And someone in the movie, got shot and kind of patched up themselves and they went on about their business. And I just looked at my husband. I was like, this is not real. That's not how it works.
Yeah.
Is this what people think happened to me? That I just kind of dusted myself off and it was fine. And so even the way that is portrayed, absolutely does not reflect reality in any sense. And it's just, it's weird to think about how if that's your only, relation to guns, how that would impact your beliefs and what you think about that.
Yeah, that was one of the things I thought of too, is watching all these cop shows, the amount of times that someone gets shot and then it's just not a big deal. They're fine a week later. And the other part of it is even if there's physical effects, there's never any exploration of emotional, psychological effects. People just can be fine the next day and not be emotionally affected by it, which also seems really unrealistic.
Yeah, especially, if someone, there's a handful of TV shows that have done, school shooting episodes, and the kids are always right back at school, right back in the building where it happened. And that's not really how it is in reality, or people who are shot at work like I was, they just go right back to work seemingly without any issues. And, if people can do that, that's wonderful. But that is not my experience. That's not the experience of people that I'm close to. And we don't talk about those things. The emotional impact, the mental impact, even my husband and I were watching a show the other day, Mayor of Easttown, which is really popular right now. And, someone in that show gets shot and then it's, la-di-da, back to the environment where this happened.
It's all fine.
I was just like, man, these are interesting messages that we're sending out into the world right now.
Going further into the second part of the book, like I said, some of the specific things about gun reform. Why is this something that Christians should care about? I care a lot about us engaging things politically. And I think a lot of people that listen to the Holy Post have a sense that our witness in the world, our political witness in the world matters as well. But why is this a particular issue that Christians should get involved in? Are there Christian reasons for us caring about this? Obviously, we care about loss of life and we care about the dignity of human beings, but I think it would just be helpful for someone to hear you talk about why you think Christians specifically should get involved in questions about gun reform policy specifically.
Yeah, after I was shot, it took a while for it to sink in with me that I don't think I'd ever had to engage in a conversation about that before. And, I remember the first shooting I saw in the news after I was shot and just thinking, oh, this is just going to keep happening. I wasn't the last one. I don't know why. I don't think I'd had a concrete thought of that. Oh, well, now it won't happen to me anymore. But when I did start seeing it in the news again, it kind of hit me, oh, this is just going to keep happening, isn't it? And no one is really around me is really talking about it from a spiritual perspective. And so for me, as someone who has just been in the depths of this and experienced the trauma and the suffering and seen the ways in which it's impacting other people I know, it was hard for me to go to church and listen to people talk about other issues. And as, protecting, fellow image bearers and protecting life and valuing life. And I am sitting here as someone on the other end of this issue that is constantly taking life and stealing image bearers from the world. And no one's talking about it. And how is this possible? I couldn't square it anymore. So to me, what it really comes down to is, are we as people of God willing to look at this issue and say, wow, this is a lot of people who are dying. It's a lot of people who are having to go through physical suffering, emotional suffering, spiritual suffering. They're not able to thrive in this world as people of God, as people who were made in his image. How can we help these people? How can we confront this issue that is actively impeding the furthering of God's kingdom on this earth? And why aren't we willing to talk about that? Just like a whole other thing. So to me, it's really this idea of acknowledging the suffering of our neighbors, and it even takes us beyond like that, the physical suffering, the emotional suffering, and looking at how gun violence impacts our communities, the ways in which it steals resources from our communities and sends people further into things like poverty and, kind of generational cycles of violence and trauma, and that our kids are growing up in this way. To me, no matter which way you look at it, whether you're just looking at the numbers, you're just looking at, the physical damage, it just is a pro-life issue. There is just no other way for me to see it. To me, I think so often about the story of the Good Samaritan, and it just often feels like we're just walking along the path and we're seeing this issue, we're seeing this suffering as a result of gun violence. And it's like, I can't really help with that. That I know that's happening, but thoughts and prayers, like that's kind of the attitude that we often have to that. And it takes someone coming along and saying, wow, I'm going to look at this suffering. I'm going to confront this, even if it makes me a little uncomfortable, even if I don't really know what to do right away. And I'm going to figure out what I can do to stop this. It just seems to me like we should want to intervene in any form of suffering and death and violence. And this one isn't like cornered off from that. Like this one is available for us to care about. It's right here. It's right here. By the end of the day today, 100 people will be dead and 200 more will be injured every single day in America. And we kind of just pretend like it's not something that we are obligated to care about.
Oh, I love that image of the Good Samaritan, that it helps make it a choice thing. Like sometimes I think I'm just living my life normally. It's like, no, there are things, you're watching the news, you're seeing these things happen. If you're not choosing to be engaged in some way, when you have the resources, like we live in a democratic nation and you have the ability to push for things to change, then you should you should do it. I love that you have a whole chapter on responses to common arguments against gun reform. I think it's really helpful both for people who might be uncertain. Like if you're coming into this and you're like, I don't know if that's a great idea, you have a place to go and kind of go systematically through, here's some of the arguments, as well for people who are having difficult conversations with family or friends. They have a resource there. What would you say are, just to give people like a sample, what would you say some of the most common arguments against gun reform are and why they are not good arguments?
Yeah, I think the most common one is that guns don't kill people, people kill people.
Yeah.
And which when people say that to me, I'm always like, yeah, that's true. People do kill people and they do it with guns. Like both of these things can be true. Like, yeah, people kill people. There is evil in the world and there are people who will commit acts of violence. Should we continue to make it so easy for those people to do that? I don't think so. So yeah, we do need to look at, what causes people to commit crimes and what drives them to do that. And we also need to look at how they're doing it and how we're giving them access to doing those things. To me, that's one of those arguments where it seems that the two sides are pitted against one another, but really that is a great example of how those things work together and both sides can acknowledge, like I can say, yes, a gun does not have legs. It cannot get up and go shoot someone. That is accurate. But if someone who's already feeling angry or lost or without hope and they have access to a gun, that gun makes that person more deadly. So I think we can look at both things. Yeah, that's probably the one I get most often. Another, is that any form of gun reform is a slippery slope, and that we're going to take all guns away. And I think I talk about that in the book. The slippery slope argument. It's called a fallacy for a reason because it's not really how things work. And I get the fear there of if we limit access to one gun, it's a gateway into limiting access to all guns. But we have a system of checkpoints and checks and balances in a way, the ways that laws get passed. It's really hard to pass laws in our country. And it's really hard to take away laws, to amend laws in our country. It's very hard to do both things. And things have to get through a lot of people, a lot of systems for those things to happen. And there are checks there. And no one has proposed to take away all guns. In the history of America, this has not been something that's ever been taken seriously or ever been put up for a vote. So to me, that's an argument where that argument is mostly rooted in emotion rather than the way our system actually works. And so if we can kind of talk more specifically about how laws get passed and why that's an impossibility, then I think we can find more common ground there. I'm trying to think of some other ones.
Those are the two I hear the most from people.
Yeah. I think those are really common ones.
Yeah. What would you say to people listening, either who really already disagree with you, right, or coming from a different perspective, but probably more importantly, to people who are having these conversations with friends or family this is a touchy subject for them. This is something that I feel like gets talked about on the Holy Post a lot, is like us having cross-political, cross-theological conversations with friends and family where things are just really hard. And like you just said about how, especially that second kind of common argument is rooted in emotion, those conversations get emotional and they can be really difficult to have with friends and family. And yet, as I was reading your book, two of the main thoughts I had was, one, I was making a list of like people I wanted to give the book to because I thought this would be really helpful. But two, it just made me think about how important it is on a political level, on a local level, on a communal level, for this to be able to change in the world. It will require us to have conversations with people that disagree with us about it. So what would you say are helpful ways for us to try and have this conversation in a healthy way, or things you have found? I know that in your own life, as you have, I liked the part of the book where you were talking about this became important to me. I was slowly becoming kind of an activist, and that caused difficulty with some people in your life, and it caused conflict. And so, yeah, if you could just talk a little bit about how we can have those conversations better from different perspectives.
Yeah, so I think the number one thing that I really personally try to remember, and this is kind of a rule in my own house, like even with my husband, the rule is we assume the best about each other. And no matter how I'm feeling or what I might be like basing those emotions on, when I come into that conversation, I'm going to assume the best about the other person. When it comes to gun violence, I'm going to assume right off the bat that while we may disagree on it, we both want to see less people die or suffer as a result of gun violence. We may disagree on the ways we think that is possible or how we should get that done. But I like to come into the conversation just kind of giving that benefit of the doubt right off. And that might disintegrate as the conversation goes on. I might not keep believing that. But if I can start there, then I think that's a much healthier mindset than coming into it, kind of already really defensive, already feeling like we're just so far apart, because then it just starts feeling like, what's the point? What's the point? And I think we all feel that way about a lot of these conversations. I mean, I don't have every conversation I want to have, because sometimes I am like, there's no fruit here. This probably isn't a great conversation to have. So I think starting there. The second thing I would say is that it is very rare that you're going to see someone's mind change right before your eyes in the middle of the conversation you're having. This has never happened to me. I've had conversations, where people say, oh, okay, well, I'll think about that some more. And to me, that's like shoot off celebratory cannons, because that is a great thing to hear in a conversation that you're having. So take that pressure off. Like if you're having this conversation waiting for the other person to be like, wow, I've totally changed my mind in this moment about this very important issue, and I now agree with everything you're saying, and it's just not going to happen. And so take that pressure off. Like it is okay. What we're trying to do with these conversations is to open the line of communication, plant little seeds and thoughts in people's minds. I mean, this is how our minds change, right? Is that we give people new frameworks to look at things. So if I'm talking to someone about maybe a specific loophole in the law, maybe it's we have what's called the Charleston loophole, which is what if a background check isn't returned within 3 days, the firearm seller is able to sell that firearm to the person, whether or not they actually pass the background check. So if I tell people about that, and then maybe a few weeks go by and there's a shooting in the news and that comes up, that person now has a little tiny bit of background knowledge to view this shooting through, right? Now they have something in their mind where they can say, oh, wow, maybe this person shouldn't have been able to buy that gun. Maybe the system needs more time to work. Maybe we should expand background checks, right? Like we have to give people a framework to understand how gun violence works. And, I was reading something one day, and we were kind of talking about arguing online and how we have these debates online and how it can feel so pointless and fruitless. And like, why do we do it? No one's minds are changed. And I don't 100% disagree, but I do disagree a little bit, because my mind has been changed on a lot of things, because I watch people have conversations and debate a little online. Most people that are paying attention aren't actually getting in the conversation. They're watching you have it. and they're learning.
Yeah.
I don't think I ever engaged in those conversations, but I was watching and I'd come back to it and say, oh, I had that question too. I wonder what this person said about it. And so these conversations you're having might not be just for the person you're having them with. It might be for someone that's kind of hanging out with you, someone else that's watching and listening and thinking, oh yeah, I was wondering that too, but they're afraid to ask. Which leads me to another thing. Make yourself a safe person to have hard conversations with. No one likes to feel stupid or ignorant or shamed because of something. And I say this as someone who has done all these things to people, I am sure, and I've had them done to me. So I do not do this perfectly, but it's wise to make someone know that you're an accessible, safe person to come to and say, hey, I've been thinking a little bit about this and I don't really know how I feel, but like, what do you think about this? Or what would you say to this?
Yeah.
People need those kinds of people to have these conversations and to process their thoughts with. So I think those are a few of the things that for me really help me when I'm having those conversations. And also, like, it's okay to shut it down. It's okay to say, hey, we tried. I don't know that this is going in a good direction. I don't know that we're going to agree, but like, maybe we could, revisit this another time, or I'll think about this thing you said. Just say, hey, I'm not going to engage in this conversation with anymore. It's totally good to set a boundary. You don't have to have every conversation with every person who asks you to engage. So just know that too. I tell myself all the time, like, your one conversation with your Uncle Joe at Thanksgiving is not going to end gun violence. It's not going to change the world. So take the pressure off. If it doesn't go well, that's okay. Hey, you did it. You tried. Maybe you learned something. You got a little bit of practice. Like, and if it didn't go well, guess what? That's okay. Like, that wasn't going to end gun violence anyway. Take the pressure off. Move on. It's okay. Like, we've all had really terrible conversations like that. And that's okay.
Yeah, I think that's good. That's such good advice for all of these kinds of things that we're trying to have conversations with our family and our friends about, political stuff, theological stuff, to know it's kind of like evangelism, where it's like some of the pressure's off because God is sovereign and you just have to be faithful. And if you are faithful to what the truth is and what he's asked you to do and called you to do. And sometimes I love that you're like, sometimes it's just done. Yeah. Like, that's not my lane right now, or that's not what God's asking me to do. But I love that having faithfulness as just, that's the metric of success. And I hope other people are convinced. I really want to see changes in communities where people's minds are changed. But I love that reminder just generally that, like, it is not all up to us.
Yeah.
We talked a few, I don't even know how long ago. I don't know when this is airing, but we talked a while ago with Sky about his book about prayer. And I asked him specifically about the phrase thoughts and prayers because I was thinking about your book. And I was also just thinking about how thoughts and prayers has become such a, like, that means now I don't care.
Yeah.
Like, if someone, like, if a politician tweets something and someone responds thoughts and prayers, what that means is, like, I could not care less about this. And I am going to make no effort to do anything about it. Can you talk a little bit about, I think some people, especially Christians, hear how that phrase has begun to be used, and we kind of take it as a personal offense in the kind of culture war way, right? Like, someone is against prayer and that is bad. Yeah. And I love that the title of the book is what it is, because it's so representative of what the problem is specifically for Christians, that we think we just don't have to act. We can just send thoughts and prayers. But can you talk a little bit to the people who might feel like, well, that's, prayer is good. Like, God is sovereign. I should pray to God. Talk a little bit about why that phrase is unhelpful in this conversation, or maybe even why it can be hurtful to people who are going through something like what you went through.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I think, first of all, what I would say, if you are a Christian and you feel offended by this phrase, even by my using it as the title of this book, if you feel offended that people are kind of belittling prayer, I would offer to you that you might need to be more offended by how prayer is being used almost as a scapegoat by people that use this phrase as an excuse, as something to kind of just get people off our backs. because that's what happened to me. I got offended by that because I care so deeply about prayer and I believe in prayer so much. I talk about this in the book, like, I don't know how different my experience would have been if I hadn't had so many people praying for me. I absolutely believe that those prayers of people I know, people I don't know, people across the country that were praying for me at the time, I absolutely believe it changed my life and that God uses prayer. And because I care so deeply about prayer, I hate that it is being used as a cop-out. Prayer should never be used as something to appease others. And it isn't an endpoint, right? Like, we need to look at prayer as a starting point. We do this in our everyday lives. Oh, maybe you are thinking about taking another job. You're going to pray about it. Maybe you're thinking about moving. You're going to pray about it. And then you're going to do whatever else needs to come next. You're going to talk to God about it, and you're going to ask God for his wisdom and for his leading. And then you go along with your thing, because that's how life works. But we've turned this phrase, thoughts and prayers, into just a cop-out, into something we say. It's so predictable. As after any mass shooting or any mass tragedy, anything like that, oh, we're sending our thoughts and prayers. Our thoughts and prayers are with you. And typically that's it. That's it. Thoughts are great. Prayer is amazing. So thankful for prayer. But we need people to do more. And God is asking us to do more. Like, this takes us right back to the Good Samaritan, right? Like, you're walking by, oh, I'm praying for you. Well, that guy needs medical attention, and he needs food, and he needs clothes. And like, your prayer means very little to him without being accompanied by meeting his physical needs. And I think we can look at gun violence or any sort of justice issue through this lens as well. Prayer is great. Prayer is important to me, but I also needed support. I needed counseling. I needed medical attention. And we need to apply that same thing to these large scale issues. If we're going to this is a political issue, and I think it is a spiritual issue as well. Yeah. And if that's true, then we need to apply this model of prayer and action. God, what do you want us to do about this? You gave us feet and hands and a sound mind. How can we use these things for your glory and the good of others? As my friend Jess Conley always says, for the good and the glory, for the good of people and the glory of God. How can we pray and seek wisdom and then use those things for other people? So that's why the book's title is what it is. Yeah. So we need to, I don't want to echo the culture wars rhetoric and say we need to reclaim thoughts and prayers, because I don't think we can do that. I do think we need to take a hard look at how that's being used and take offense. Hey, don't use prayer, which is something so important to us, in a way that makes you feel less liable to act and do your job and protect people and take action. Don't use prayer to get out of those things. I think that's really what we should be worried about.
That is great. And that is a great way to end too. Just a reminder of I love the way you said that, of instead of being offended that someone is denigrating prayer, being offended that someone would use something we care about to justify their own inaction. That's a really good way of putting it. Thanks, Taylor, for talking today. And thank you truly for myself for writing this book, because I was not kidding when I said I really think it's one that will change some people's minds, or will be one of those one of the parts of a bunch of things that change their mind, like you said. And I think it'll also just equip a lot of people to have better conversations, not just more conversations, but better conversations with their family and friends about something that's really important for communities of faith to take seriously.
Yeah,
so
thank you.
Thanks.
And just to say too, there is a discussion guide in the back of the book. So there will be, kind of questions to go through for yourself or with people to kind of help facilitate some of these conversations that are a little hard to have, as just another way to give a resource to people, because it can be hard just to say, hey, let's talk about gun violence. That's pretty big. So that will be available in the back of the book as well. So, and thank you so much for having me. This was great.
That's great. Yeah. So when thoughts and prayers aren't enough, a shooting survivor's journey into the realities of gun violence, you should get it. And like Taylor said, you should read it with some people and talk about it.
The Holy Post podcast is a production of Phil Vischer Enterprises, that's Phil's company, and Sky Pilot Media, that's Sky's company. Production assistance by Julie Betcher. Editing by Jason Rugg. Help us create more thoughtful Christian media by supporting us at patreon.com/Holy Post. Also, be sure to leave a review on iTunes so more people can discover thoughtful Christian commentary plus ukulele and occasional butt news. Visit holypost.com for show notes, news stories, and more.